You're back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. An occupation is underway in Glasgow, Scotland. It is the occupation of the Wynford high-rise flats. This occupation is being conducted by the Young Communist League, which issued a declaration as follows: statement on the occupation of Wynford high-rise in Glasgow. Declares that they are officially under political occupation. For sentences, communist youth have successfully occupied the high rises in collaboration with the people of Wynford. This comes as an inevitable consequence of Wheatley Homes' refusal to negotiate with the Wynford Residents Union throughout its 14-month campaign to save the high flats. Here to discuss this matter with me now is Stephanie. Stephanie is a member of the YCL, and while she cannot go into some specifics about what's going on, she can give us some background. So first of all, Stephanie, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. So you mentioned in your statement, the group collectively mentions that there's been a 14-month campaign to save these flats. These were flats, I understand, built in the 1960s for working class families. Is that right?
So the flats are a mixture of one-bedroom and bed-sit style property studio apartments, and they were originally purpose-built to house retired members of the community. And they are fantastic pieces of architecture. They are very open, big, wide open windows, very light inside. They overlook the Forth and Clyde Canal, the Maryhill Locks, and the Kelvin Walkway. And you get a fantastic view of the whole of Glasgow from the top of the buildings. So their original purpose was to be a safe and communal area for retired people to live out the rest of their lives.
And who's living there now? Mostly retired people, or a different mixture? Or
well, this is part of what we recognise as a systematic, progressive degeneration of the area. The landlord has, over a period of years, placed a lot of vulnerable single adults in the apartments. It's a lot of people who struggle with mental health issues and addiction, and they've really overpopulated the flats with people like that without providing them with the adequate wraparound care that they need and deserve. And what that's done is increase crime and feelings of discomfort among the wider community, concentrated in those buildings. And it's not the fault of anyone living in those buildings per se. The blame for us lies at the door of Wheatley, the Wheatley Group, who are the current landlords of the buildings. They took over from Cube in 2021. Cube Housing Association were the landlords for some years before that. I'm not sure who it was before then. I think originally they belonged to Glasgow City Council. So it's been a progressive degeneration of the flats, led by the allocations policy.
So, and that's what I wanted to get a background on so that people understand, because to me, as I understood the story, and perhaps I'm wrong, but as I understood the story, this is part of a global trend. This was my impression of it, that public housing is built, or housing that's built on public land, or on, at government initiative, when governments were more willing to do such things, and that they're built, for the betterment of working people, for the use of working people. That there's this process underway in many cities now around the world of taking this kind of property and privatizing it, using it to private advantage, squeezing out the people that it was originally meant for, perhaps tearing the old buildings down, not maintaining what is there, and then tearing it down and replacing it with, apartments or buildings for the well-to-do, whether it's condominiums or what have you, and then working people and people with special needs, older people, all sorts of people get squeezed further and further out of the community. And when I first heard about your occupation, my sense was perhaps this was a part of this global trend. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's certainly our experience. Glasgow City Council used to own the majority of housing in Glasgow. Very few people owned their homes in Glasgow in the sort of post-war period. And through a long period of decades, really, it's been siphoned off into what are known as public-private partnerships. That's what the Wheatley Group is. It's a very clever ploy in order to privatise what used to be public housing. And we're in a situation where rents in the social housing sector can continue to rise, even though they're capped for the private sector. And the Wheatley Group will do things like ask us if we're okay, yes or no, are you okay with your rent going up 1% per year? And they don't really give you an option about it not going up at all. It's you can choose 1% or 3% sort of thing. It's there's not really the community don't have enough of a say in how their community is run and how the housing is run. And I definitely identify with the issues you raised there about the repairs and care of the properties not being in place. If you have a look at images of the high rises in Wynford that we're trying to save, the mould and dampness down the sides of the building is visible from the outside. They have not been properly insulated. They're very fortunate in that we are part of a scheme that was piloted by the Scottish Government to deliver district heating systems to many communities across the country. So we are connected to a district heating system that essentially works by taking the water waste products from homes in the community and regenerating that to produce electricity and electric heat, and then redistributing it back into the community. And that runs at a very low cost to the environment and to the consumer. But aside from that, the energy efficiency of the buildings it's not up to the standard it could be. The buildings do have an EPC, that's energy efficiency rating of C, which is actually higher than most social housing in Scotland. That the average is D, but they could be better. And I think if priorities were right, they would be better and could be made very easily better. And we've had multiple, we can talk about it a bit later on, I guess, but we've had multiple renowned architects put forward a positive case for retrofitting the buildings in a way that's far more sustainable than the plans put forward by the Wheatley Group.
Okay, and before we go on, I can't resist saying, Stephanie, that this choice of a 1% increase or a 3% increase seems to me to be a metaphor for our political systems nowadays overall. Nobody gives you the choice of, what you may need, which is rent relief, let's say. So that said, what has the Residents Association been trying to do and negotiate unsuccessfully with the Wheatley Group, which owns it? And what does the Wheatley Group say it's going to do?
So in 2021, I believe it was, every resident in the community received a consultation pack, which gave you information about what they were proposing to do in the community. It involved an unnamed refurbishment of the community centre, which we can assume means flattening it, because that's what they tend to do with things. And it also involved demolishing the high-rise buildings. And part of the consultation, they were asking things like, how excited are you about the regeneration plans? There wasn't really much space to disagree. And we strongly suspect, because we've asked multiple times for clarity on this, we strongly suspect that if you didn't respond negatively to the consultation, they assumed that you were positive about the consultation and about the plans. We actually had a local councillor, a local representative, inquire with Wheatley about this, asking for iron-cast clarity on the issue. He asked, could you please state whether or not those who didn't respond to the consultation were counted either way in your statistics? And Wheatley still dodged the question. So it's fair to assume that they've counted those who didn't respond as being positive about the regeneration plans. So that was where it all kicked off. We felt we weren't properly consulted about the plans, and where concerns were raised, they weren't taken seriously. We also felt that in the context of Glasgow being the host city of COP26, they didn't properly look into avenues for retrofitting the buildings. What we're talking about wasting here in demolition is 20,000 tonnes of carbon, aside from the 600 houses. That is an astonishing amount of carbon. And the retrofitting plans that we've put forward instead were designed by renowned architects. We've got Professor Alan Dunlop, who's a Scottish architect, Kate McIntosh, MBE, who designed the Dawson Heights, and those buildings are listed now. Professor Miles Glendenning of Edinburgh University, Dr. Barnabas Calder of the University of Liverpool, and Professor Asterios Agathidis have all backed our position on this, and they've said that there isn't really a good enough reason not to retrofit those buildings. We've created our own plans for the buildings with the support of these architects, which would see them refurbished into 2 and 3 bedroom family homes. And indeed, that would decrease the number of houses, but the buildings would remain, and it would save 10,000 tonnes of carbon in the process. So we see it as being worthwhile exploring those avenues, especially in this period of critical climate catastrophe. That's what we're facing here. And we don't feel that the City Council or the Wheatley Group have taken that seriously.
And it feels like a reasonable proposal. I mean, it doesn't feel like we won't negotiate at all. I mean, it feels like, there's a little bit of collaboration there. And so it hardly seems at all unreasonable. Let me ask you so my understanding is there are 4 buildings, right? There are 4 high rises, and they house thousands of people. And, how did, I know there's certain things you can't talk about, but how was the occupation agreed upon by all those concerned, and how did it, take place? I see a banner hanging from one building and some red smoke and so on, but what is it actually, how was it, first, I guess, how was it agreed upon?
So we didn't want to occupy the buildings. I just need to say that straight off the bat. That was the last option. We have exhausted all possible opportunities at this point to get Wheatley to sit across the table from us as the Residents' Union. And I should clarify at this point that I'm also a member of the Wynford Residents' Union. It's my local tenants' union. And it was through that I became personally involved with the campaign. And then because we have a number of communists in the Young Communist League who live locally, that's how the Young Communist League came to be involved. We are local people, and this has been driven by local people from the outset. We had a public meeting where we had the architects put across the position that we have, and that was attended by some representatives, MPs and things. It wasn't taken seriously by Wheatley. We have applied to Historic Environment Scotland for listed status on the buildings because they are an example of post-war mass housing. And there are similar buildings like Dawson Heights that I referenced that was designed by Kate McIntosh earlier that have been awarded listed status, and that would mean that the buildings are protected and they couldn't be demolished. So we have exhausted multiple avenues here to save the buildings, and it's only at this point where we have pledges among tenants of each of the 4 buildings who are saying they will refuse to leave. They've pledged to remain in the buildings till the bitter end. And backed by that, we, as the Young Communist League, have stepped in to provide support to them by occupying the buildings. I'm not personally involved in occupying, and that's why I'm able to speak about it today, just to clarify that. And it's not only the Young Communist League who are involved. We've had support from Friends of the Earth, Just Stop Oil, some other climate activist groups, and other political parties as well. This is a real broad church of progressives involved in this. It's not, I think it's quite often a misnomer that it's run by activists. It's very much not. It is run by the community. It's local residents that have driven this from the outset.
So what is the timetable? Well, let me back up a second. What has been the reaction of Wheatley Group and the authorities so far?
So there have been 6 arrests so far on charges of vandalism. Those who were arrested have come from a mixture of the groups that are present, as well as being local residents, and they were taken and released again within 12 hours, and they are all still very positive about the campaign, want to support in whatever way they can, although they are not involved in the direct action side of things anymore.
So is it a waiting game now? Is it just waiting to see what their next move is? Is it, I've been, in occupations and, you have to eat, you have to, go about. So what's the expectation going forward? Are they going to, you think they'll bring in the police and try to arrest people, or is it going to be months of waiting, or any
I think
idea?
we can expect probably more police activity. I think everyone is expecting that, and those who are occupying are prepared for that. We're prepared for the long game. It's already been, as you said, a 14-month-long campaign so far. In terms of time scale, Wheatley are looking to demolish the buildings beginning in April this year. So we really want to try and delay that as much as possible. That's the goal at the moment. And we've just the other day written an open letter to Glasgow City Council asking them to allow Historic Environment Scotland an appropriate amount of assessment time so that they can properly look into our application for listed status. Because of this time frame of demolition, they have told us they don't feel they've got enough time to really assess the application. So if Glasgow City Council can award us that time, we would maybe have an opportunity to reassess the position with occupation. But until that point, we really feel our hand has been forced with this. And it also depends on the residents as well. As long as they want to stay there, we will be there and the buildings will stay up.
And, my sense of Glasgow is that, as I mentioned earlier, like a lot of cities, many parts of it are now gentrified, and what was a working class city now can be unaffordable for a lot of people. It's also my sense that if, for whatever it's worth, that if you organize around something concrete, literally in this case, but something, that affects people's lives, that's how you organize, right? So I'm curious to know what kind of attention this has gotten in general among the people in Glasgow itself, whether it's in the newspapers or television or radio or just on the street. Are people paying attention?
Yeah, definitely. We've had some great coverage in the local press and in the national press. We were on STV News last night. We've been across paper media mostly and online media. We have had a recent article in the Architect's Journal. So there's a bit of a broad church. I think the Sun newspaper was out in the scheme today, taking some pictures and taking some interviews. It's largely been very positive. I think that the biggest counterclaim that Wheatley have been able to present to us is that apparently 87% of the community agree with their plans, but as I already debunked earlier, we dispute those claims because we don't feel that the community were adequately consulted on it. And this is backed up by the interviews that we're conducting ourselves of local residents who say that they weren't asked about the demolition, they were informed about the demolition. And then a lot of them have said they felt coerced to leave their homes. And that's a whole other issue where the people that have been dispersed from the buildings and decanted from the buildings are being sent to all angles of the city. They're being sent from the northwest to the southeast, moved entirely, uprooted from communities that they belong in.
And which is also part of the sort of neoliberal, global scheme to deconstruct communities, isn't it? Well, Stephanie, I think you guys are doing a great thing. I we'll be following it with great interest. I hope you or someone else will be able to come back and keep us posted on it, because I think it's these kinds of actions that are the models for, rather than waiting for others to do these things for us, for working people to do these things for ourselves. So I wish you all the very best of luck, and please do keep us posted. And thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.